Welcome back everyone to the channel. Today's story, it's different. Really different. It comes from a confidential source, someone who's been through things deeply profound. This isn't fiction, folks. This is real life, raw and unfiltered. We're diving into a tale of love born in the darkest places, about choices made out of pure desperation, and secrets that can change everything. Fair warning, this story isn't for the faint of heart, and it does touch on some sensitive themes. But I truly believe it's going to resonate with you on a deep level. Now, before we jump in, just a quick word, that subscribe button, the like button, and the share button, you see them down there, right? Go ahead and hit those for me, yeah. It seriously makes a huge difference. No kidding. It's how we keep bringing you stories like this, it's how this channel survives and grows. So, if you're ready to hear something truly unforgettable, let's get started. The bass thumped in Thaya's chest, a relentless pulse mirroring the anxiety clawing at her throat. Glittered dust, cheap perfume, and desperation hung thick in the air of the velvet rope, a downtown club where the music was loud enough to drown out your conscience, if you had one left. 22 years. That's all she was. Barely out of college age if life had dealt her a different hand. Instead, life had given her Leo, a bright-eyed, mischievous 5-year-old with a laugh that could melt glaciers and a body that was slowly, relentlessly being attacked from within. Leukemia. The word itself was a cold, heavy stone in her gut. The hospital bills were a monster, growing faster than she could slay. Even with 2 waitressing jobs, scraping by meant ramen dinners and eviction notices fluttering under her apartment door. Her savings? Gone. Her pride? Shredded. Oh, fading fast. Tonight was different. Tonight wasn't about tips. Tonight was about desperation. Her manager, a slick-haired man named Marco with eyes that lingered a little too long, had suggested a way to supplement her income. Private dances, Thaya, he purred, his voice oily smooth. Some of our clientele, they appreciate a little extra attention. Discreet, lucrative. Think of it as accelerated tips. Thaya had flinched. Private dances. It was club code for something she'd sworn she'd never do. She'd seen the other girls, the ones with the practiced smiles and the way they moved, bodies honed for one purpose. She was different. Or she had been. But Leo needed a bone marrow transplant. The clock was ticking. And accelerated tips sounded like a lifeline, however dirty. She wore the uniform, barely their black dress, sky-high heels that made her ankles scream, makeup that felt like a mask. Each forced smile felt like chipping away at the last remnants of herself. She navigated the crowded floor, dodging drunken advances and the predatory gazes that made her skin crawl. Men in expensive suits, their eyes hungry, their hands roaming just a little too close. Suddenly, a hand touched her arm, not grabbing but a firm, almost hesitant touch. She turned, steeling herself for another sleazy proposition. He was different. Older, maybe late 30s, early 40s. Sharp suit, but it wasn't flashy. His eyes, a deep, intelligent gray, didn't leer. They held something else. Curiosity? Maybe even a flicker of sadness? "Excuse me," he said, his voice a low rumble that was surprisingly gentle amidst the cacophony. Could I get a drink?" Relief washed over her. A real drink order. Not a grab, not a proposition, just a drink. "Of course," she managed, her voice a little shaky. "What can I get for you?" He ordered a bourbon, neat, and watched her as she signaled the bartender. His gaze was steady, almost unnerving, but not in a threatening way. It was like he was trying to see through the makeup, the dress, the whole club facade. When she returned with his drink, he nodded a thanks, took a slow sip, and then met her eyes again. "You look out of place here." Thaya's breath hitched. Out of place. She wanted to laugh, a bitter, hollow sound. Out of place? She was drowning here. "It pays the bills," she said, the words clipped, defensive. He didn't push, just nodded slowly. "I get it. Everyone's got their reasons." He paused, then his voice dropped, becoming even more intimate, even with the noise around them. "I'm Ethan, by the way." "Thaya," she replied, the name feeling foreign on her own tongue, like another part of the costume. He held out his hand. She hesitated for a beat, then took it. His grip was warm, firm, and again surprisingly gentle. A jolt, unexpected and unwelcome, shot through her at the contact. "Thaya," he repeated, the name rolling off his tongue with a different weight. "Look, I'm not going to pretend I'm here for the intellectual conversation. But I'm also not looking for the usual." Her heart pounded. This was it. The proposition. She braced herself, ready to play the role, to swallow her revulsion for Leo's sake. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping even lower. a conspiratorial whisper. Lonely. And frankly, a little tired of the usual charade. Would you be willing to spend some time with me? Upstairs? Upstairs. The VIP rooms. Where the private dances happened. Where the real money changed hands. Her stomach twisted. She looked at his eyes again, searching for the usual predatory gleam. It wasn't there. Instead, she saw something vulnerable. Something broken. Maybe he was just a different kind of broken than the men who usually frequented this place. Maybe he was just better at hiding it. How much? She asked, the words flat, devoid of emotion. She had to detach. It was the only way to survive this. He frowned, a shadow crossing his face. That's not really what I meant. He paused, then seemed to gather himself. Let's just say, a lot. Enough to make a difference. Enough to help with those bills. He gestured vaguely, but she knew exactly what bills he meant. Leo's bills. The offer hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Her skin prickled. This was it. The moment of truth. Sell herself, piece by piece, to save her son. Was there really any other choice? Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Hospital number. Her blood ran cold. Excuse me, she whispered, pulling out her phone, her hand trembling. She stepped back, her eyes locked on the screen, fear tightening its grip around her chest. It was probably nothing. Just a routine checkup reminder. Right? But as she answered, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The voice on the other end was strained, urgent. It was the night nurse from the pediatric oncology ward. Miss Thea? You need to come to the hospital. No. It's Leo, he's taken a turn. The club music faded into a dull roar. Ethan's face blurred. All she could hear was the nurse's voice, the frantic pounding of her own heart, and the terrifying whisper of the word that had haunted her for months. Leukemia. I have to go, she stammered to Ethan, her voice barely a breath. My son, he's sick. She turned and fled, heels clicking frantically on the sticky club floor, leaving Ethan standing there, bourbon glass half empty, the unspoken transaction hanging heavy in the neon-drenched air, suddenly insignificant against the raw, desperate urgency in her eyes. The accelerated tips, the VIP room, the lonely man in the suit, all of it vanished in the face of a mother's primal fear for her child. Tonight, the price had just gone up and it wasn't measured in dollars anymore. Ethan watched her go, a black dress disappearing into the pulsing crowd like a shadow swallowed by neon. He stood there, bourbon untouched, the ice melting slowly, mirroring the way the club's manufactured allure was dissolving around him. Son, she'd said. My son, he's sick. The words hung in the air, stark and raw against the synthetic sweetness of the club's atmosphere. Suddenly the smoky haze felt less alluring, more suffocating. The thumping bass, once a seductive rhythm, now just a headache in waiting. The carefully constructed fantasy of the velvet rope, ripped apart, revealing the harsh reality beneath, desperation, vulnerability, and the quiet ache of human need. He'd come here looking for something. An escape? A distraction? He wasn't even sure anymore. The usual avenues of release, the carefully curated dates, the fleeting encounters, they'd started to feel hollow, like eating plastic fruit. He was 38, successful, alone in a penthouse apartment that echoed with the silence of his own making. Then Thea. She was a flicker of something real in this manufactured world. Her initial guardedness, the flicker of fear in her eyes when he'd touched her arm, it hadn't been a turn-off. It had been intriguing. Authentic. He'd sensed the steel beneath the fragile surface, the way she held herself, a delicate balance of defiance and resignation. And those eyes. God, those eyes. Haunted, yes, but also fiercely intelligent, shadowed with a pain that felt familiar. He saw a reflection of his own loneliness in their depths, a shared understanding of the quiet battles fought in the dark corners of life. He'd been drawn to her not just physically, though she was undeniably beautiful, a raw, untamed beauty that the cheap dress couldn't quite mask. It was more than that. It was the sense that beneath the surface, there was a story, a struggle, a person worth knowing. Upstairs, he'd said, the word thick with unspoken promise. He'd meant it as an offer, yes, a transaction of sorts, but even as he'd spoken, something had shifted. It wasn't just about the physical anymore. It was about connection. A fleeting, desperate attempt to bridge the chasm of his own isolation. He hadn't pressed her for the details about her son, sensing the raw vulnerability radiating off her. He'd just offered the accelerated tips, a crass club term for something that felt suddenly inadequate. He'd been prepared to pay for her time, yes, but now he realized he wanted more than just a transaction. He wanted to understand. to help. Maybe even to connect. Her abrupt departure, the frantic urgency in her voice, it had thrown him. He'd been left standing there, the unspoken deal hanging in the air, feeling strangely empty. Not just rejected but concerned. He finished his bourbon in a single swallow, the burn a welcome distraction from the unsettling shift in his gut. He signaled Marco, the manager, a silent question in his eyes. Marco, ever the astute observer, caught the drift immediately. Via? Family emergency, Marco offered, his voice low and confidential. Kid sick. Hospital run. He shrugged, a practiced gesture of clubland indifference. Happens. But it wasn't just happening for Ethan. It felt different. He wasn't just another John whose night had been cut short. He was invested. Strangely, inexplicably invested. He pulled out his wallet, peeled off a stack of hundreds and slapped them onto the bar. For her, he said, his voice clipped, leaving no room for argument. For the trouble. Marco's eyebrows shot up, but he didn't argue. Cash was king in this place, and Ethan was clearly signaling he wasn't done with this night, or with Thea. Ethan stepped out of the club, the humid night air a stark contrast to the air-conditioned chill inside. The street was a kaleidoscope of city noise and flashing lights, but his focus narrowed. He scanned the sidewalk, the taxi queue, the faces blurring past. He didn't even know her last name. Just Thea. And a son named Leo. Sick. Hospital. He spotted her then, a small, frantic figure half a block away, flagging down a cab with a desperate wave of her arm. He broke into a jog, adrenaline suddenly surging through him, a primal urge to what? To stop her? To help? He wasn't sure, but he knew he couldn't just let her disappear into the city night. Thea, he called out, his voice cutting through the urban din. She stopped, turned, her face pale and streaked with mascara, her eyes wide and haunted. He reached her, slightly breathless, the city noise fading into a background hum. Ethan, she breathed, a flicker of surprise mixed with something else. Relief? Confusion? Hospital, he stated, not a question. Which one? She blinked, as if struggling to process his presence. St. Luke's, she whispered, her voice still shaky. Pediatric wing. Without another word, he took her arm, gently but firmly guiding her towards the curb. A black town car idled a few feet away, his regular driver, silent and discreet, waiting patiently. Get in, he said, opening the back door for her. I'll take you. She hesitated, her eyes darting between him and the open car door, a silent battle raging within her. Suspicion? Wariness? Or maybe just sheer exhaustion blurring the lines of caution. I don't have any money for a cab, she mumbled, her voice barely audible. He waved a dismissive hand. Don't worry about it. Just get in. Leo's waiting. The mention of her son seemed to break through her hesitation. She nodded slowly, a fragile, almost defeated gesture, and slid into the back seat. He followed, closing the door behind him, the plush leather and hushed interior a world away from the chaotic energy of the velvet rope. As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving the club and its false promises behind, Ethan turned to her, his gaze steady, his voice low and serious. Tell me about Leo. The city lights blurred past the window, painting fleeting streaks of color across her pale face. And in the hushed intimacy of the car, Thea began to talk, the dam of her carefully constructed composure finally cracking, the story of neon tears and hospital bills spilling out into the darkness, guided by the quiet, unexpected presence of a man who had started as a stranger, and was now perhaps something more. Something hopeful. Or maybe just another ghost of a chance in a city full of them. The sterile white of the hospital room felt miles away from the velvet darkness of the club, yet the tension was just as thick, just as charged. Ethan sat beside Thea in the waiting room, the silence punctuated only by the hushed announcements echoing through the PA system. He'd driven her to St. Luke's like a man possessed, the city lights blurring past in a frantic race against an invisible clock. Now they waited. For news. For Leo. For something neither of them could name. Thea was a fragile statue beside him, her club makeup smudged, her black dress crumpled, but her eyes, those haunted, captivating eyes, were fixed on the closed doors of the pediatric wing. He'd offered platitudes, he'll be okay, they're the best doctors here, but they sounded hollow even to his own ears. Words were cheap currency in the face of a child's illness. He did the only thing he could think of, he took her hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly, but she didn't pull away. Their hands rested together, a silent, unexpected point of contact in a world suddenly gone sideways. When the doctor finally emerged, his face was etched with professional weariness, but his words were a cautious balm. "He's stable for now. Fever's down. We've run some tests." He went into medical jargon, a torrent of terms Ethan barely grasped, but the gist was clear. Leo was still desperately ill, the leukemia relentless, the need for a transplant urgent. Thea listened, her breath held captive in her chest, then finally exhaled, a shaky, ragged sound. "Thank you, doctor." It was barely a whisper. Ethan stood, his hand still loosely holding hers. "What now?" he asked, the question directed at both the doctor and Thea, a silent plea for direction in the sudden, overwhelming chaos. The doctor spoke of options, of bone marrow registries, of the daunting odds. He spoke of hope, but his eyes held a flicker of grim realism. It was going to be a long, uphill battle. As they walked away from the doctor, the weight of the unspoken hung heavy between them. Ethan had driven her here, offered comfort, a silent hand to hold. He'd even paid her club wages, a gesture that felt both strangely formal and oddly intimate. But the unspoken agreement from the velvet rope, the upstairs proposition, it remained unresolved, a ghost in the room. "Thank you," Thea said again, her voice still fragile as they stood outside Leo's room, watching the small, pale form sleeping amidst the tangle of tubes and wires. "For everything." "Don't," Ethan said, the word sharper than he intended. "Don't thank me. Not yet." He wasn't sure what he meant, but the gratitude felt premature, like a closing statement before the trial had even begun. The next few weeks became a blur of hospital visits, tests, and the gnawing, ever-present anxiety of Leo's illness. Ethan found himself drawn back to St. Luke's, not out of obligation, but out of a compulsion he couldn't quite explain. He brought Thea coffee, lukewarm hospital cafeteria fare, sometimes just sat with her in silence, the unspoken tension between them a constant hum beneath the surface. He paid for Leo's tests, accelerated tips, escalating into something far more substantial. He wasn't her customer anymore, not really. He was something else. A lifeline. A shadow? He wasn't sure. One evening, weeks into this strange, unspoken dance, he found Thea exhausted, slumped in a plastic hospital chair, her face pale and drawn. Leo was sleeping fitfully, his small chest rising and falling with labored breaths. "You can't keep doing this," Ethan said, his voice low, concerned. "2 jobs, the hospital, you're going to collapse." She looked up at him, those weary eyes searching his. "What choice do I have?" He hesitated, the unspoken proposition from the velvet rope, hovering in the air again, but this time it felt different. It wasn't about a transaction anymore. It was about survival. For both of them, in a way. "Move in with me," he blurted out, the words surprising even himself. Her eyes widened, shock flickering across her tired face. "What?" "My penthouse," he clarified, the words sounding absurdly opulent in the stark hospital room. "Plenty of space. Less commute. I can help. With Leo. With everything." It was a proposition, yes, but not the one he'd offered at the club. This was about something more fundamental, more desperate. A merging of 2 broken lives, a fragile alliance forged in the crucible of crisis. She stared at him, searching for the catch, the hidden agenda beneath the offer. "Why?" she finally asked, the question raw, vulnerable. "Why would you do this?" He didn't have a neat answer, no smooth line to deliver. He just knew he couldn't walk away. Not from Leo. And not from Thea. Something had shifted in him that night at the club, a crack in his carefully constructed isolation, and Thea, with her haunted eyes and quiet strength, had been the one to pry it open. "Because," he began, then stopped, searching for the right words, the honest words. "Because I can. And because I want to." He left the deeper, more complicated emotions unspoken, the burgeoning feelings that were starting to feel dangerously close to something else. She moved in. Not with fanfare, no illusions of romance, just a quiet, almost clinical relocation. Her few belongings, Leo's small suitcase of toys, moved into his sterile designer apartment, a splash of raw, real life against the polished chrome and glass. The penthouse became a strange sanctuary, a space where hospital visits and whispered anxieties coexisted with the hushed luxury of city views and room service. Ethan became a fixture in Leo's life, reading him stories, distracting him during painful treatments, his presence a quiet, steady anchor in the storm. He watched Thea with Leo, the fierce, unwavering love in her eyes, the tender way she cared for her son, and something inside him began to thaw, to unfurl. He'd lived for so long in a self-imposed emotional winter, and Thea, with her own quiet resilience, was bringing a fragile, hesitant spring. One evening, months into their unconventional cohabitation, Leo was finally asleep, the hospital monitor blinking steadily beside his bed in the penthouse's converted nursery. Thea stood on the balcony, overlooking the city, the lights twinkling like fallen stars against the velvet night. Ethan joined her, the city breeze ruffling his hair. The unspoken tension was still there, but it had shifted, softened, layered with something new, something akin to intimacy. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small velvet box, the weight of it heavy in his palm. He'd bought it on a whim, a reckless, impulsive gesture that felt both terrifying and inevitable. He turned to her, the city lights reflecting in his gray eyes, his voice low, sincere. "Thea," he began, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "I know this is unconventional. And we started, strangely." He paused, took a deep breath, the city air filling his lungs, the unspoken words hovering on his tongue. "But I'm not just doing this because I can help with the bills anymore. And it's not just about Leo, though God knows I've come to love that little guy like he's my own." He opened the velvet box, revealing a simple, elegant diamond ring, the city lights catching the facets, making it sparkle like a captured piece of the night sky. "Thea," he said again, his voice thick with a sincerity that surprised even himself. "Marry me." The city noise faded into a distant hum. The only sound was the gentle hum of Leo's monitor, the soft breeze rustling around them, and the breathless silence hanging between them, heavy with the weight of a question, the price of a promise, and the fragile, unexpected hope of a future neither of them could have imagined just months before, in the neon-drenched darkness of the velvet rope. The bone marrow registry was a black hole, swallowing hope and spitting back despair. Weeks turned into months, and the search for a match for Leo stretched on, a relentless ticking clock echoing in the sterile hallways of St. Luke's. Thea was fraying at the edges, her usual quiet strength worn thin by sleepless nights and the constant, gnawing fear for her son. Ethan watched her, his own anxiety a cold knot in his stomach. He'd thrown money at the problem, pulled every string his influence could reach, but leukemia was a relentless adversary, indifferent to wealth or connections. The penthouse, once a symbol of his sterile success, now felt like a gilded cage, trapping them in a shared, desperate vigil. "We have to try everything," Thea had insisted, her voice hoarse, her eyes burning with a fierce maternal resolve. "Family, friends, anyone." The doctor had suggested it too, the grim statistics hanging heavy in the air. Direct relatives offer the highest chance of a match. "Have you contacted the father, Miss Thea?" The question hung there, sharp and pointed. Thea's silence was a heavy weight in the room. Ethan had seen the flicker of pain in her eyes, the subtle tightening of her jaw. He knew better than to pry. Some wounds were too raw to touch. But the doctor's words resonated. Direct relatives. Ethan felt a sudden, unexpected surge of something. Responsibility? Guilt? A primal urge to protect? He wasn't sure. All he knew was he couldn't stand by and watch Thea crumble under the weight of this impossible search. "I'll get tested," he'd said, the words impulsive, driven by a need he couldn't fully articulate. "I know it's a long shot, but maybe?" Thea had looked at him, surprise warring with disbelief in her weary eyes. "Ethan, you don't have to." "I want to," he'd cut her off, the words firm, resolute. He did want to. More than that, he needed to. It was a threat of action in a sea of helplessness, a way to push back against the relentless tide of Leo's illness. The blood test was quick, clinical, a vial of crimson drawn with practiced ease. Ethan tried to dismiss it, another long shot in a game of impossible odds. But a sliver of hope, fragile and unexpected, had taken root in his chest. Days crawled by, each hour stretched taut with anticipation. Ethan tried to focus on work, on the relentless demands of his corporate world, but his mind kept drifting back to the hospital, to Thea, to the ghost of a chance hidden in a lab report. Then the call. Dr. Jensen's voice, crisp and professional, on the other end of the line. "Mr. Hayes, we have the preliminary results from the bone marrow compatibility test." Ethan's breath hitched. He gripped the phone, his knuckles white. "And? It's unusual," the doctor said, a note of professional bewilderment in his tone. "The HLA typing, the match probability is exceptionally high. Like parent-child level high." Silence stretched, thick and heavy, across the phone line. Ethan's mind struggled to process the words, to reconcile the clinical jargon with the impossible implication. Parent-child level high. "Doctor," he finally managed, his voice strained, barely a whisper. "Are you saying?" "Mr. Hayes," Dr. Jensen interrupted, his tone shifting, becoming more direct. Are you aware of any biological relationship to Leo Maxwell? The question slammed into Ethan like a physical blow. Biological relationship. Leo Maxwell. Via. The velvet rope. 4 years ago. A haze of expensive liquor, a fleeting encounter, a nameless, beautiful girl in a black dress. Fragments of memory, long buried, surfaced with jarring clarity. The club. The karaoke noise. The smoky air. A girl's face, young, vulnerable, shadowed with a sadness that had mirrored his own. A brief, intense connection in a world of superficiality. A hotel room. A hurried departure. Cash left on the bedside table, a silent, clumsy apology for a night he'd barely remembered, a night he'd dismissed as a meaningless transaction. And now this, parent-child level high. His blood ran cold. The pieces clicked into place, forming a horrifying, undeniable picture. Leo. Via. Him. He swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. Doctor, he said, his voice rough, barely audible. I need to see those results. In person. The hospital room was quiet, Leo sleeping peacefully, his small chest rising and falling with a steadier rhythm than Ethan had seen in weeks. Thea sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her gaze fixed on the doctor who stood before them, holding a thin sheet of paper. Dr. Jensen cleared his throat, his expression a mixture of professional detachment and something akin to awkwardness. Ms. Maxwell, Mr. Hayes, he began, his voice measured. I have the results of Mr. Hayes's HLA typing. And, well, they're quite conclusive. He handed the paper to Thea. Her brow furrowed as she scanned the lines of numbers and medical jargon, her eyes darting back and forth, confusion clouding her face. I don't understand, she murmured, her voice barely audible. What does it mean? Dr. Jensen hesitated, then turned to Ethan, a silent plea for him to take over, to translate the clinical data into human terms. Ethan stepped forward, his heart pounding against his ribs, his gaze locked on Thea's bewildered face. He took the paper from her trembling hand, his eyes scanning the stark, undeniable numbers. It means, he said, his voice low, thick with a dawning realization that was both terrifying and strangely inevitable. He met Thea's gaze, the haunted depths of her eyes mirroring the sudden storm raging within him. It means, Thea, I'm Leo's father. The air in the room seemed to thicken, to solidify, trapping them in a bubble of stunned silence. Thea's breath hitched, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes widening with disbelief. Leo stirred in his sleep, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just ripped through their carefully constructed world. Ethan watched her, the weight of his past actions crashing down on him, the ghost of a promise from a forgotten night suddenly taking terrifying, undeniable form. 4 years. 4 years of blissful ignorance, while Thea had struggled, suffered, fought a battle he hadn't even known existed. 4 years of him living his life, oblivious to the consequences of a single drunken night, a night he'd dismissed as a meaningless transaction, a night that had irrevocably, devastatingly connected them forever. And now the bloodlines were screaming the truth, a truth he could no longer ignore, a truth that had the power to shatter everything or perhaps to finally, impossibly, piece it all back together. The revelation hung in the air, thick and heavy, a bombshell detonated in the sterile quiet of the hospital room. Father, son. 4 years ago, the words swirled, colliding and reforming into a truth that was both devastating and strangely liberating. Thea stared at Ethan, her face pale, tears welling in her eyes, not of despair this time but of a raw, disbelieving shock. You knew, she whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan shook his head, the guilt a sharp, physical ache in his chest. No. Not until, just now. The doctor, the test, it all clicked. He reached for her hand, his touch hesitant, unsure if he deserved to offer comfort. She didn't pull away. Her fingers tightened around his, a fragile anchor in the sudden storm of emotions. That night, she breathed, the memory surfacing hazy and fragmented, through the fog of years. The club, you were kind. The word sounded almost ironic, given the context of their initial encounter. Kind? Ethan echoed, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. I left you money on a bedside table, Thea. Kind isn't exactly the word I'd use. The shame washed over him, a cold, corrosive tide. You didn't have to, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Most men, they wouldn't have even done that. There was a strange, almost heartbreaking acceptance in her tone, a low bar of expectation born from years of hard knocks. He pulled her closer, his arm around her shoulders, the weight of her fragility a stark reminder of everything she'd endured, everything he'd unknowingly inflicted. "I'm sorry, Thaya," he murmured, his voice thick with remorse. "God, I'm so sorry." The apology felt inadequate, a paltry offering in the face of years of hardship, but it was all he had. And in that moment something shifted between them. The price of a promise from The Velvet Rope faded into insignificance, replaced by something far more profound, far more valuable. A shared history, however fractured and painful, a shared child, a shared future, trembling on the edge of possibility. He didn't let go of her hand as he turned to Dr. Jensen, his voice regaining its usual steel, but now laced with a raw urgency. "The bone marrow transplant. Am I a match?" The doctor nodded, a flicker of professional satisfaction in his eyes, the puzzle finally solved. "A perfect match, Mr. Hayes. We can schedule the surgery as soon as possible." Relief washed over Ethan, a tidal wave of emotion so intense it almost buckled his knees. He looked at Thaya, her face still pale but now etched with a fragile hope. "He's going to be okay," he said, the words a promise, a vow. "Leo's going to be okay." The engagement wasn't a grand, orchestrated affair. It happened weeks later, in the hushed intimacy of their penthouse, after Leo's successful transplant, after the storm had started to recede, leaving behind the fragile, tentative shoots of a new beginning. Ethan knelt before her, not on one knee but both, humbled, vulnerable, the velvet ring box trembling in his hand. "Thaya," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "We started backwards. We started with a price tag, a transaction. But somewhere along the way that price became worthless. Because what I feel for you, for Leo, it's worth more than gold." He opened the box, the diamond catching the city lights, a symbol of a promise forged in fire and tempered by hope. "Marry me, Thaya," he pleaded, his heart laid bare. "Let me spend the rest of my life proving to you, to Leo, that I'm worth a ghost of a chance." Tears streamed down her face, but this time they were tears of joy, of release, of a fragile, hard-won hope finally blooming in the barren landscape of her past. "Yes," she whispered, the word a soft, breathy affirmation. "Yes, Ethan, I will." Family acceptance followed, a balm to years of isolation. Ethan's mother, initially wary, met Thaya and Leo, and the ice around her heart melted like snow in spring. She saw the fierce love between mother and son, the quiet strength in Thaya's eyes, and the undeniable bond that had formed between Ethan and Leo. Bloodlines, it turned out, ran deeper than social divides. Thaya's sister, reached by a frantic, tearful phone call, was overjoyed, her initial shock giving way to a sister's fierce protectiveness and a deep, heartfelt happiness for Thaya's unexpected turn of fortune. The broken threads of their family began to mend, woven together by the unexpected miracle of Leo, and the improbable love story blooming in the heart of a penthouse overlooking a city of dreams. Leo's recovery was a slow, joyous climb, each milestone celebrated with quiet, heartfelt gratitude. Color returned to his cheeks, laughter to his voice, mischief to his bright eyes. He called Ethan Dad, the word hesitant at first, then uttered with a child's unreserved love, a sound that resonated deeper in Ethan's soul than any boardroom applause. And then, the final, unexpected blessing. Months into their engagement, amidst wedding planning and the joyful chaos of a recovering child, Thaya realized she was late. A doctor's visit confirmed it. A new life blooming, a sibling for Leo, a testament to their love, a symbol of their future. "A little girl this time, maybe?" Ethan whispered, his hand resting protectively on her gently rounded belly, his eyes shining with a happiness he'd never thought possible. Thaya smiled, a radiant, truly happy smile that reached her eyes, erasing the shadows that had haunted them for so long. "Maybe," she murmured, leaning into his embrace, the city lights twinkling around them, no longer cold and distant, but warm, welcoming, reflecting the incandescent glow of a love that had been forged in darkness, paid a heavy price, and was now, finally, worth more than all the gold in the world. Their happy ever after, imperfect, unexpected, but undeniably, irrevocably theirs. Wow. Seriously, wow. This story, right? It just hits you hard. It's a reminder that life, it's messy, it's complicated, but sometimes even in all that mess, you can find something beautiful. And remember, these are real stories, guys. Real people, real lives. And if you want to hear more untold stories like this, please hit that subscribe button, give this video a like and share it around. It's not just clicks, it's support. It's what lets me keep bringing these stories to you. Thank you so much for listening. And I'll catch you next time, with another story from the shadows.